This is Charlie, and I've just spent an hour recording a video that was just too long. So we're gonna do this much faster. I've read 93 books so far this year as of the 28th of November 2025, and I thought it would be cool to kind of just reflect on each of those books and going by quarter. So this one is my quarter one. It's gonna be the longest video because I read 32 books in that time, and so I'm just now going to just go month by month, and I'm not going to tell you too much about the books. I'm just going to tell you if I liked it or didn't. That's it. Let's get to it. That's it. Let's get to it. So stats. I'm gonna put a bunch of stats up. I don't have them, unfortunately, but I'll put them up. I know that I read 11 books. I think I read more audio than physical, but the stats will be up there. I read more fiction than non-fiction. And my average rating, I think, was like a 4 point something. All of that will be put up here. Cool. So first book that I finished was Lost Love, Songs of Boise Sing by Ingrid Prasad. This is the first book I've ever read by her. I have Love After Love, which I've heard nothing but amazing things about, which I have not read yet. And I wanted to get the physical version of this book, but I couldn't get it. I couldn't find it anywhere. And so I just bit the bullet and listened to the audio, and I'm glad I did. Absolutely love this book. Only gave 4.75 stars, but honestly, I think I was just nervous to give it 5 stars as my first read of the year, but it was a 5-star read. I think that Ingrid Prasad's decision to tell the story of somebody who's very infamous from the perspective of the women in his life really added some extra texture and color to the fact that no man, no person is an island, but also the fact that there's so many people, in particular women, who are written out of history. And I thought this was a great way to honor them, whether they're fictional or not. Absolutely fantastic book. Then I finished The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion by Kai Miller. This is a book that I probably should not have listened to. I need to get the physical version of it because I don't remember much about it. And I even rated it 3.5 stars. Kai Miller is always fantastic. I'm not really a poetry girly, and I think some of the stuff was poetry, but I also think that the method that I choose to consume this book was not appropriate for me to give it a proper critique because I can't remember it. Then I read Erasure by Percival Everett, and this was a fantastic book about an African American author who likes to write about Greek mythology, but his books aren't selling, and he keeps being told to write more Black. So he decides to take the piss, and he writes a book that is absolutely facetious, and they lap it up so much, and he makes so much money. I gave it 4 stars on the Storygraph, but honestly, the book itself was a 5-star read. I bought the physical version, which isn't again at the moment, but when I get it back, I plan on reading it again sometime next year, because I think as an audiobook, there was lots of things that I missed because initially I couldn't tell when it was about the author's life and when it was about the book that he was writing, and that's what caused some confusion for me in the beginning. But then I watched the adaptation, American Fiction, which was phenomenal, a phenomenal adaptation. Just how absurd this book is, and also just how absurd the publishing industry is in general, as well as the filmmaking industry in general. But it was such a good book. It deserves a 5-star, even though I put 4 stars here. It's definitely one of those that I'm gonna rank up to a 5. Loved it. Then I finished Jade Wall, which is the second book in the Green Bones saga. This was a really good kind of in the middle bridging book. I wouldn't say boring. Look, it did take me a long time to read it, but it was just because I wasn't in the right headspace for it. So, it took me, I don't even know how many, if I went to go look at how many, might even be years for me to mention. I think I might have started it. No, I started it in 2024. Yeah, started in 2024, I think about May, and I finished it in Jan. And it's not that I was reading it every day. I would read other books and finish other books. So I just wasn't in the right headspace to read it until I said, Charlie, sit down and read it. And then I was like, yeah, I'm into it. I think what was cool about this book is that there are characters who we're introduced to, who feature in the first book that we don't really get to explore. And this book lets us get to know them a whole lot better, perhaps because they're in leadership roles, and maybe it's also because it's a few years later, but I really enjoyed it. Gave it 4.5 stars, and I'm ready to read Jade Legacy some point. Then I read We Are Origin. This is the first book of a duology of the Wrath of the Gods by C.M. Lockhart. This is a debut, and even though I really enjoyed the book, I found it thoroughly enjoyable, and I will finish the series. There are parts of the writing style that make it feel like a debut, because there were aspects that I felt like the author was telling and not showing. Also, I really didn't like the twist at the end. I just felt like it was just so left field. So, I don't know, it didn't really move the story. It wasn't really connected to the breadcrumbs that we were getting throughout, and just felt so left field. But I want to finish the series. I definitely want to check out the next book when it comes out as an audiobook. And I gave it 3.75 stars. Then I finished The Country of Others by Leila Slimani. This is book 1 of the Country of Others series. I believe there's a book where it's about a Moroccan made in France, and there's also another. So I own that book, and then there's also another book that I own, which is in Uganda. But I picked this one up because I wanted it to count towards Charlie Reads Around the World for the book Morocco. However, I don't think I want to count this book to count towards Morocco, because it's more of a book about a French woman living in Morocco and not so much about a Moroccan person's lived experiences in Morocco, which is what is important to me about this Reading Around the World challenge. But I love the writing style. It was a book I could not put down, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read House of Ashes by Monique Roffey. Read this book for Read Caribbean, and I'd read another book of hers before, which was The Mermaid of Black Conch, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I went into this completely blind. It's a book that is critiquing, I guess, a movement against dictatorships or violence as a movement of resistance. And I did not appreciate it. I have to admit, I felt like it felt a bit like propaganda. And yeah, I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Disorientation by Elaine Tsu, which I thought was phenomenal. Gave 5 stars. It is a book about a PhD student who is unraveling as she's confronted with yellowface in the publishing world, and I think does a much better job than the book Yellowface by Arif Khan. Not that I didn't I loved Yellowface. I gave that one 4 stars, but I just felt this was a lot more effective around what the implications are of Yellowface on Asian Americans' identity, etc. You know, just all the different aspects of such a betrayal, at a much deeper level, and I loved it. I gave 5 stars, as I said. Then I read Kairos by Jenny Eprenbeck. This was, I think, the winner of the International Booker Prize in 2024. Book was written in German, translated into English, so it counted for women in translation, but I also read it for Charlie Reads Around the World for Germany. Interesting book. I really enjoyed kind of seeing what life was like for people living when, you know, Germany was split between the East and West, and in particular if you lived in Berlin. But it was a weird book about a young girl having an affair with a married man, and what that was like. Then I read Lemon, and I gave that one 3.5 stars. Then I read Lemon by Kwon Yo-sun. I love books by South Korean authors, and so when it was recommended to me, I went in completely blindly, and I was like, yep, let me check it out, and I did enjoy it. I gave 4 stars. It's a psychological thriller about a young woman who returns back to her childhood home and is basically trying to discover who murdered her sister. And then the last book for January, and I gave that one 4 stars, as I said. Sorry, and the last one for January was The Human Origins of Beatrice Porter and Other Essential Ghosts. This was a book that I started reading in December for Read Caribbean, and then I didn't make it, and so I just kind of took my time with reading it, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. I think in hindsight, I might make it 5 stars. I think that sometimes people are like, Charlie, you give 5 stars too easily. So that's probably the reason why I didn't give 5 stars. But honestly, I think it was a 5 star read. Um, and it's a book that explores womanhood in a world that hates women, that yeah, and the impact of generational trauma on how you raise women, on how you identify, on the decisions that you make, how you live in this world and try to heal or try to exist in a world that wants you dead or broken at the very least. And yeah, loved it. 4.5 stars, but I feel like maybe I should have made it 5 stars. So that is January, the 11 books that I finished. So in Feb, I also read and finished 11 books. And I'm going to put up the average rating. I'm going to put up the split between fiction and non-fiction. I think it was majority fiction again, and then audiobook versus physical. I think I might have had more physical / digital than audiobook in Feb. All right, so first book that I finished, Standing Heavy by Gauze, book that I read for Charlie Reads Around the World. This is for Côte d'Ivoire. It does take a lot of time in France, but it is told from the perspective of an Ivorian living in France and touches on some of his lived experiences in Côte d'Ivoire. And yeah, it's a observation of being a French person from Côte d'Ivoire coming to France and then suddenly being turned into an immigrant almost overnight, and explores just the impact that has on everything from your livelihood to your identity to your humanness. And it was well written. I did struggle, however, because some of the chapters were quite long. And that's because it's a short book. I think it's like 167 pages, so I should have finished it a lot earlier than it did. But other than that, I enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Woman at Point Zero by Nawal El Sadawi. I read this one in Egypt, and I was grateful to have read it in Egypt, but also maybe not so much because I started looking at Egyptian men in a very negative way. But this is the fictionalization of a real woman's lived experience in Egypt, a woman who has been completely abused and traumatized and terrorized by all sorts of men throughout her life. And at the end of her life finds a way to take back her power so that her death is on her own terms, in spite of everything that people are trying to do to her. It was a 5-star read for me. It is a truly harrowing book, so do check content warnings before you read it, but I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. Then I read my first graphic novel of the year, Season of the Bruja, Volume 1 by Aaron Duran. This is a story of a young girl who is suddenly thrust into a position of power and leadership and importance unexpectedly. Her grandmother's been preparing for this, but they weren't ready for it, and it just comes about, and she's now figuring things out on the go. I wish I had more access to more volumes. I'm going to check everywhere because this was, of course, read in Feb, so maybe there's more available now, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. Then the next book that I finished was The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. I, at the time, did not know that she is a Zionist, and now that I know that, I'm not going to talk about the book. Next book is All About Love, New Visions by Bell Hooks. This was a book that had such a profound impact on me. I've heard some people say that she is potentially a Zionist. I haven't confirmed that she is or isn't yet, but to be on the safe side, I will not talk about this book. Then my next graphic novel, or first manga for the year, was Orange, Volume 4. I think there are like 5, maybe. I think she might have extended it to 7. So this is by Ichigo Takano, and it's a book that is set in a high school in a small town in Japan with five friends are trying to save one friend of theirs who they are aware has because the future self sent them a letter saying this boy is going to kill himself and you can save him. It's an interesting book that explores friendship, explores the grief, trauma, and the ways in which suicide ideation comes about. And I guess it's an interesting question of can you save someone who has decided to kill themselves now, or I should say, unalive themselves? There were some of the, I'd say volume 2 and 3, I wasn't so sure about how it was tackled or addressed, but I would say 1 and 4 I felt were handled a lot better. And I don't know if I finished this, I don't think I have finished the series yet. I don't remember finishing it yet, but who knows? I might have done it later in the year. But not the full series, but like the initial, I think the initial series is 5 volumes. I might have finished that initial 5. But I haven't finished the additional ones that have come since. And then when I'm done, I'm gonna watch the anime and see how that goes. And I gave that one 4 stars. Then I read Slow Noodles, a Cambodian memoir by Chan Sun Yuan. And I was reading this for the BookTube prize, which is now over. And at that stage, I didn't put a rating in it, but I would give it 5 stars because I really enjoyed it. It was a memoir about what it's like to basically be raised in a world where you are an other, and then wars happen and you become a refugee, and the trauma and pain and destitution that happens to people who go through that. And for her to survive this was phenomenal, and the things that she does to help other refugees to this day is absolutely phenomenal. And this is also kind of wrapped up in recipes of food from different parts of Southeast Asia because she lived in different parts of Southeast Asia. I believe she was Cambodian, but her mother was, I think, Thai. And so there's parts of her lived experiences where she's living in Cambodia and Thailand and in Laos, I believe. Oh no, maybe her mom is Vietnamese. Actually, her mom might have been Vietnamese because I think Vietnam was also featured in there. Lots of places. But beautiful, beautiful written memoir. Then I read Thieves Gambit by Kavion Lewis. This is the first book in the Thieves Gambit duology. Loved this book. Devoured it. Was ready to read book 2, but it wasn't available as an audiobook. And I want to read it as an audiobook because I thought the narration was fantastic. It's basically a bunch of kids who are the children of criminals, thieves mainly, and they enter this competition called Thieves Gambit, and whichever kid wins basically gets their wish, whatever that wish is, and it's a wild ride. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was crazy. I could watch this. It should be a TV series. I hope it will be one. Thoroughly enjoyed it. 5 stars. Then I read A Stone is Most Precious, Where It Belongs by Gulchera Hoja. This is a memoir of a lady who is an Uyghur from China, or what is now called China, and it's about her lived experience, her family. We see parts of her grandparents' lives, her parents, her sibling, her brother, and hers, as well as friends and family. And then she's very fortunate, firstly, that she's raised in a rather affluent family in comparison to other Uyghurs, and in a main city. And then she's also able to eke out a relatively good life in her hometown in comparison to a lot of other Uyghurs, and then manages to escape. Well, she leaves because her husband goes to study in Germany, and then never returns because when she leaves, she starts seeing a lot of information about, that she doesn't have access to when she's in China, and then seeks asylum in the US. and creates a whole new life for herself. Um, and it's a sad story because she escapes a dictatorship, but is separated from her family for life. Um, the one critique I have of the book, and again, it's a memoir, I gave it 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But the one critique I have of the book was when she was in the US, she made a comment about how she feels like it was safer for her to be a Muslim in America than it was in China. And whilst the experiences that she had in China were pretty horrific, we see what happens to Muslims in the US. And granted, she might have been talking about a different time in the US, maybe it was like, no, when she was there, the Twin Towers had just come down. So it certainly was I mean, I don't know, I'm not American and I'm not Muslim, but it just felt interesting because I felt like, I feel like there's some people who have a pretty rough experience being Muslim in America. Then I read Where the Rhythm Takes You by Sarah Das, and this is, oh, I forgot to mention, let me go back. Thieves Gambit was a book that also counted towards Charlie Reads and Reviews the Bahamas, so Read Around the World. Cool. And then Where the Rhythm Takes You by Sarah Das. This is set in Tobago, of Trinidad and Tobago, but I put Trinidad and Tobago as one. And it's a YA romance, which is really cute and funny and entertaining. And I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. And then the last book of Feb was Princess in Theory, which is the book 1 of A Reluctant Royals by Alyssa Cole. It's a romance. And it was entertaining. I really enjoyed it. And I'd say something about Alyssa Cole is that she's done really a great job of researching the area, because the royal was from an African country, which is kind of inspired by Botswana, South Africa, and Lesotho. Based on just some of the words used and the descriptions of people in the places. But the narrator really should have been someone who could pronounce the words that were, so there was somewhere it was just really cringy to hear. And also when they put on the African accent, I really didn't like that, and I think that's why I gave it 3.5 stars. I'm not really a romance girly, so I'll put that out there as well, but it was entertaining. I enjoyed it, hence 3.5 stars. And now we're into March. So in March, I was going down from 11 to 10 books. So read and finished 10 books in that month. I think it might have been 50-50 between audio and physical, but we'll see. I'll put a stat up there. Average rating, 4 point something. We'll put that up there. And it was definitely majority fiction. All right, so first book I finished, ironically, was nonfiction, and that was Shakespeare, The Man Who Pays the Rent by Judi Dench and Brendan O'Hare. This was a book that I read for the BookTube prize, and I started off reading this as an ebook, and then I hit a slump. I couldn't go further, and then I listened to it to finish it. It was a book that started off as a podcast, and then Brendan O'Hare decided to turn it into a book, and I wish he had kept it as a podcast. Why? Because I think listening to it as short chunks for me personally would have been better. A. B. If you're not really into Shakespeare, or you have not really whether you've read the plays or watched it, if you're not really into it, it can be really a challenge to enjoy this. I think it's a book that someone who's into Shakespeare would thoroughly love, because basically Judi Dench is being interviewed about all the characters she's ever played in different plays, as well as like talking about the plays and general experiences, the different characters, what they thought this character was meant to do, and when they met this dilemma, etc. Blah blah blah. And because I read a lot of them because of school, so like Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, Midsummer's Night's Dream, and then I've been exposed to some of the others through movies and stuff, that it wasn't the worst experience for me, but there were times when they were really getting into the detail of things where I was like, I couldn't care less. And I would have DNF'd this if I didn't have to finish it for a prize. There is no rating because it was for the BookTube prize. But if I had to give it a rating now, I'd probably give it a 3-star. It's not because it wasn't entertaining, it was at times, but I got bored because I don't care that much about Shakespeare, if I'm honest. Yeah. All right, The Remains of the Day was the next book that I finished by Kazuo Ishiguro, and this is the second book I've ever read by them. Can't remember the title of the first book that I read, but I'll put it up here, and I loved that book. And when I mentioned it to someone, they said, oh, have you checked out The Remains of the Day? So I tried listening to it back then, and I think this was like in 2021, and for whatever reason, I couldn't get into it. So I was cleaning out my Everend. I was like, oh, let's try it again. And I loved it. I really did. Like, it's a story about this manservant who is basically figuring out who he is outside of this identity of servitude, which he has been born into and raised to be the best manservant. And suddenly the tides are changing. But also in the background, we're seeing some of the like, he's in the background of a lot of really big decisions that have happened over time around World War II in particular, and different economic implications and decisions, and also about a man who, as he's traveling, he goes into places where people assume that he is very wealthy and they treat him very nicely based on it, until he meets someone who does come from the upper class and can immediately identify that he's a manservant, and I don't know, just really, I guess, a observation of what makes you human, what is the point of classism, and how do you spend the remains of the day that you were given outside of your work. Really enjoyed it, gave it 4 stars. All right, then I read Pleasant View by Celeste Mohammed. This is a collection of short stories that are interconnected, set in Trinidad and Tobago, but mainly Trinidad. And there are some really interesting characters and cultures that are represented, which shows us how diverse it is in Trinidad and Tobago. I have to admit, this book, out of all of the ones that I've ever read, this is the one that really makes me want to go visit. And it is a critique of a bunch of things, an observation of Trinidadians, Tobagans, I think that's what they're called. Really enjoyed it, gave it 4.5 stars. Potentially may push it up to 5 stars. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Then I read Survival is a Promise, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. This is another book that I read for the BookTube prize, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was really brilliant. I didn't put a rating in because I couldn't at the time, but I would have given it 5 stars. I think what Alexis does in exploring Audre Lorde's life and kind of critiquing the decisions that she has made, as well as the different articles that she's written, I think was a really good observation. I've never read anything about Audre Lorde, though. I want to preface that. And so what that makes me want to do is to go read Audre Lorde's, all of her works, and then come back and reread this book, potentially get a physical version of it, because I'd love to make notes, because I thought it was a phenomenal book. Then I read An African History of Africa, From the Dawn of Civilization to Independence. And this is by Zainab Badawi. I was very excited for this book. I was excited, but also nervous. And the reason I was nervous because the book was like less than 400 pages long, and yet it was an African history of Africa. I have read a couple of books about specific situations set in Africa. So I read The Life 1652, set in South Africa, or what is now called South Africa, in the Western Cape-ish, but the Cape of what is now called South Africa. So I would say the Capes, so Northern Cape, Western Cape, and Eastern Cape are touched on in this book at a time, and it traverses a whole lot of time to give the contextualization of 1652 and all of the implications that that has had on where South Africa is to this day. And that book was like over 400 pages, and it was just about one small region. And then I read King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hochschild, which was really set around that time period of King Leopold, which I think was like late 1800s, early 1900s is what is touched on there. And even though that traverses quite a number of years, it's really just about King Leopold in Belgium. Some of the other characters involved in it at this time, but again around that time period, and then what would eventually be called the DRC and the Republic of Congo, and that at that stage was called the Free State of Congo. And and that was also just over 400 pages, and just about this one region. And so now you've got this book that's talking about Africa with its over 54 countries, and you're talking about from the dawn of civilization, so like that's prehistoric stuff, which Live 1652 does touch on, all the way to independence, which 1652 also kind of touches on, but it's just about one country, right? Not the whole continent. So I was worried going in, and I had every right to be worried about it. But what I will say is that it's a great starting point for you to learn about different civilizations, different histories in different parts of the African continent, and then go find books that can go deeper in. It was way too shallow. And because it was so shallow, it felt like there were a lot of assumptions made, or there was some what is the word, conceptions that were not necessarily, there were misconceptions, is what I should rather say, that are being perpetuated in these stories. There's also things that are not given the correct contextualization. And I'll give one example because I'm a Ugandan. They talk about, the only time they talk about Uganda, they talk about the Baganda ethnic group I'm from, and they really talk about how they sold out Uganda to the British. And like, there's no contextualization to what had happened, how that even came about, what the British were doing in that part of the world, what the Baganda were doing prior to that. And the only reason I even know a lot of the stuff is because the BBC had a documentary about that area, and it was about the Baganda. They had one episode about the Baganda, and then they talked about all that fighting that was happening between the Baganda and the Bunyoro and etc. when the British came, and all that contextualization that I have because of that documentary that is not touched on in this book at all. It's like I think she gave it maybe 2-3 pages talking about the Baganda, not even about them, just in reference to them, but talking about Uganda as a whole. It was I didn't like that. I didn't appreciate that. There was also the portion about South Africa and perpetuating some misconceptions about the San and the Khoi people, where you call them Khoisan, which is actually quite a derogatory term. I learned this because of the Live 1652, so I encourage you to read that book. And then it also was weird to me that the civilization part is only really touching on North Africa. It barely touches on Ethiopia or East Africa or South Africa, where there are documented like cradle of mankind archaeological sites, and those are not touched on at all. And a lot of the kind of historical aspects that are touched on in North Africa are about the foreigners in North Africa, and not about I don't think there was a lot talked about I can't remember the appropriate term, about the indigenous inhabitants of those areas. And I think even the term that she used there was a derogatory term. So there's like little things like that. And it's not so much a critique on her per se. I just feel like she was given the wrong guidance to write. She's a journalist. She's not an academic, firstly. So she didn't have the time to go in deep enough. I felt like she should never have done the full continent. She could have just focused on a region. And ideally on Sudan, because she is British Sudanese. I think it would have been fantastic if she'd gone really deep on Sudan and done, the history, an African history or a Sudanese history of Sudan, and gone from, the dawn of civilization to independence. That would have been fantastic for me. And then maybe done like a follow-up book on exploring like where Sudan is now, which would be so topical because Sudan then got split up into Sudan and South Sudan, and what that war was that created that split. What is happening in South Sudan now, what's happening in Sudan, I think there would have been a fantastic book going really deep, really, really beneficial for this continent, and then inspired other journalists to do the same for Uganda and for Egypt and for Zimbabwe and for what's this, Namibia, Nigeria, etc. So yeah, I gave it 3.5 stars because I do think it's a good base for you to get an idea of different parts of history in different times, but do not take everything in there as solid, because I found, and that's just because I've read other books that go a lot deeper, I found some things that were not appropriately represented in the book. Then I read The Owl Cries by Bjorn Hye-young, and this is a book that I was reading for, I guess because it was in March. Yeah, because it was March. I was reading it for months in March. I wanted a book by a Korean author, so it just came up as a suggestion on Everand. Listened to it, gave it 4 stars. Very strange book. It's like a murder mystery whodunit book, psychological thriller in a forest in Korea. It was wild, and I was scared at some points, and yeah, it was good. 4 stars. Then I read Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, which is book 1 of the same title series by Jane Allen. I gave this one 3.75 stars. I read it because my book club here in South Africa was reading it, and I think they were going to have an online meeting. I don't know if it ends up being online or in person, but what I do know is I did not really enjoy the book. I thought it was funny and quick and easy, entertaining book to read, but I just felt that there were some things in the book that didn't feel very realistic to me. And I actually can't remember too much about it, but I do remember I wrote comments in the WhatsApp group to say my views about it. I definitely won't finish the series. It didn't grasp me as much as it was entertaining. It didn't grasp me enough for me to go read another 2 books in this series, if I'm honest. Then I started one of the best series that I have started this year, and that is the Gale Songs series. And the first book was The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. Somebody in Book Talk was talking about this book. It's a book inspired by Irish mythology, and it's episodic, mythological, and it centers around 2 women, and it's inspired by actual Irish history. Phenomenal series. I finished it now, but at the stage, this was the first book, and I couldn't put it down. I think I picked up the second one almost immediately after, but I didn't finish that one in March. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. I've only put 4 stars here. I think I was it's definitely higher. I think it's like a minimum 4.5 stars, if not higher. Or maybe it's a case of it was 4 stars for this one, but the others definitely. I couldn't put the series down. Loved it. Absolutely fantastic. And then I finished volume 5 of Orange, which I already spoke about earlier, and I gave this one 4.25 stars, which means volume 5 was definitely better than volume 4 for me. Technically, volume 5 was the end of the initial series, but when I was reading volume 5, I saw that she had added volume 6 and 7, which I have not picked up. So that's where I've stopped. And then I was like, okay, now that I'm progressing on this manga's done, let's move on to the next manga. The next manga is Spy Family. Volume 7 by Tatsuya Endo. I think the thing that frustrates me is when I first read Spy Family, which I love, I bought the first one. It was so expensive. I read it physically, and then I found that it's on oh man, there's a subscription. I'm gonna put it up here. I can't remember his name that I pay for. and I can get access to manga online. And I found it there, and so I started reading it. The only thing that annoys me is, even though I'm paying a subscription for this, which means I get immediate access to any manga that's on there, they break them down into chapters, not into volumes. And if you want into volumes, you have to pay to get in volumes. I'm not going to pay to get in volumes. And if I'm paying for a subscription, and like, just put it in the volume. So now I have to get onto the site that tells me this chapter to this chapter makes it one volume. And so that was very annoying for me. And so that's why I've been struggling to finish it, because I'll read and read. And I'm like, I don't even know where I am in this volume. Am I done with this volume? Is it, And it's similar to like when I read books with very long chapters, like it just feels like such a slog. And in a similar way, that's what it feels like for me when I'm just reading chapter after chapter after chapter, and I have no idea. And then there's chapter 1.1 and chapter 1.2, and then we go to chapter 2, and then it's like, how many chapters for this one volume? Like, can you just say this is volume 1, and then I just read volume 1? No, they can't. And I know why they do it. It's a very capitalistic reason to get me to buy the book, and I refuse. So I just push through. So I finished volume 7. Spy Family, 4.5 stars. For Spy Family, basically, I think I did a video on here, maybe it was on TikTok, is basically there's a spy in this fictional land, which is ironically based on when Germany was split between East and West Germany. I think, just based on the premise. That's what it's giving. And the spy comes from whichever side is the capitalist side. Is, I think, West Germany? I don't know. And he's trying to infiltrate East Germany because there's some big weapon that they're it's not called Germany, they call it a different thing in this, but east side of this wall. And he needs to get as close as possible to the leader, who looks like Adolf Hitler a lot, which is really weird because, anyways, it's just weird. And in order to get close to him, he wants to get through him through his family, and so he needs a family to get his kid into this really exclusive school, and they're very, very, very strict about how people can get into it. And so he ends up meeting a random girl who he pretends, gets into an arrangement with her that they can pretend to be married. He adopts an orphan, and they get a dog. And what it turns out is that the orphan she was experimented on when she was a baby, and so she's actually got telepathic abilities. The dog that they adopted also happens to be an experimented on dog, so also has telepathic abilities. And his girlfriend / wife, fake wife, is an assassin who inadvertently works for the East government. But he doesn't know this. She doesn't know that he's a spy. The kid knows because she's psychic, and so she can read your mind, and so she can hear their thoughts, so she knows everything. And the fake wife's brother works in the government and does not like her husband. But it's a hilarious kind of story, and each chapter looks at each different character. Sometimes it's from the family members, sometimes it's the people in their community, in their world. And I'm on volume 7, or I finished volume 7. And when I first started this, there were only 10 volumes. And now I hear that I think it might be on 16 now. So every time I'm like, oh, I've got 3 to go and to get to 10, there's another 6 that have come out. So I really need to make a move on it to at least finish the first 10, and then we'll track the remaining whatever's left later. So I gave that one 4.5 stars. So I really did enjoy this episode. Okay, looking at the cover, I see what it was about. This is by Tatsuya Endo. And I will finish the series. I'm just taking my time with it. And so there you go. Those were the 32 books that I read in Q1 of 2025. In my next video, I will be looking at Q2, which are less books, and so hopefully should be faster than this one was. Happy Friday.